So just welcome, and thanks for coming out today. We'll get started here in just very, very shortly. Here on stage, like I said a moment ago, we have our very first panel. We have John Hare, who came up in local broadcast journalism. He used to be at Wood TV. He went on to become a producer at CNN all the way through the mid-2010s. He's now here as an account executive with a local software firm based in Grand Rapids. Welcome to John Hare. We have Elizabeth Drouillard, co-founder, editor, and reporter at Candor Media, local investigative news site. Welcome. And this is Denavvia. I'm so sorry, Denavvia. I'm nervous, and I usually don't go up on stage like this by myself. Denavvia, help me out.
Denavvia Mojet.
Denavvia Mojet, thank you very much. I didn't want to attempt tackling it by myself. An organizer, political strategist, hosted a radio show on local politics, which moved into a Facebook live stream, turned into a podcast. It's going to be returning soon. She does a lot of really cool stuff. Welcome to Denavvia. So we're going to talk a little bit about local journalism, news deserts, exactly what's been happening over the last, say, 10 to 20 to 30 years here. There's been a lot of changes. John has spent a lot of time in local journalism. John, I want you to tell me about a typical day in broadcast journalism, say about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right back at the beginning of your career. There's been a lot of changes since then. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen, and how do they affect your day-to-day job?
Okay. Hello. I hope my audio level's good. Let's see. So, what was a typical day 20 to 30 years ago in broadcasting journalism? Well, let's see. Before Wood TV 8, I'm a student at Full Sail University in Orlando, Florida, and that's where I was able to obtain my degree. I worked at West Channel 2 for 2 years, and then came back to Grand Rapids, Michigan, because I wanted to be close to friends and family, and started really cutting my teeth at Wood TV 8 at the time. So you had Wood TV 8 and WOTV, and let's see, at that time you had the likes of Tom Van Howe, Suzanne G. Haw, Craig James, of course. Craig James. And that was before Bill Steffen was over on Channel 13. But the typical start off of the day, you get up in the morning and you love what you're doing. I started with the AM broadcast, so it was morning day break. So Terry DeBoer was the meteorologist, and it was exciting. You literally had your finger on the pulse of what's going on, locally, and of course you would have an idea of what was going on a national level, because before you would go on air and you would edit and cut the videotapes for the local news, you would also be paying attention to that wall that showed everything that was going on out there in the big, huge world. And I loved it. And so we started 5 a.m. in the studio, 4:30, 5 a.m. to, 6:30, wrapped up, and we would start recycling what we were going to cover for that noon broadcast, 12 o'clock. And then you were done, and, you went home, and you look forward to the next day. That's what it was like 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and it sets us up for really what we're about to dive into, which is what has changed since then. You especially talk about something interesting, which is you go home and get ready for the next day. Tell me a little bit more. I suspect that things are a little bit more always on now. Tell me about what things look like.
Yes. Well, before I go there to now, right now, that segue from local news,
yeah, of course,
to world news, it changed drastically. I was at Wood TV 8 for 7 years, and then from there left Grand Rapids, Michigan, and then moved down to Atlanta, Georgia, and then became involved with CNN News, and not just CNN, but it was also Cartoon Network. It was a number of others. So it was Turner Broadcasting Systems. So you had Cox Systems and a number of other organizations, but it was under one umbrella. That was a different world, because I lived in Atlanta, but it was about a 15-mile drive to downtown Atlanta. That would take about 2 hours, and then once you hit at the time, that was the Omni Center, okay, which kind of dates me. You'd get on the escalator and you'd go in and you'd walk into the studio, and then that was just, I'll never forget the experience. I walked in, and just from wall to wall, there was a feed literally of live activity in the world. And you had from Christine Amanpour to reporters all over the place, and you had clocks, and it was different time, and the world became all of a sudden a lot more granular. And you were aware. You were aware of what was going on. It gave me an opportunity to travel. It gave me an opportunity to experience things that I think that I would not have experienced. And it also tested me. And I also experienced the gatekeepers in some ways too, being told you aren't supposed to be here, you shouldn't be capable of doing certain type of things, and then working professionally in that realm, believe it or not, even on a world news level. That did exist, that was there. And it felt good. But at the same time, there were some realities to it too. When you're working in world news and you're being flown, or you show up at a site and you have a camera and you're tired and you don't always have a hotel room and you're with a crew, and next thing there's gunfire that's going on, and it's a reality. And it's pretty humbling. I remember my parents would call me and ask me if I was okay and wanted to know if I was there. But it still felt good. It was a time to really be alive. Now, today, I get up in the morning and I let my 2 beagle puppies out in the backyard. I work for a company called Fusionary that's here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and our focus is digital strategy. So I sip my cup of coffee and I get in the car and I drive to downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan, an old, I think it was Flourishman's shoe store now, and we help corporations with their digital strategy, whether it's activity, web development, things of that nature, a much more calmer place. But I still am aware and I pay attention to what's going on as far as the news is concerned. Of course, help those individuals, whether editing or things like that, or someone who's trying to cut their teeth. So that's what my days are like now.
Great answer. And then just to set the table then for the rest of our discussion, your career has spanned things like the rise of the internet, the rise of social media, widespread cell phone and texting and all of these things. When you think about the way all those changes have affected news, is there really one big one that floats to the top that has changed the way the job works?
As far as technology is concerned?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
I'd have to say the mobility. The mobility has changed. There was a time where even if it was local news, you literally had a camera. You had a Niagara, which was for the actual Niagara for the recording. Cameras were, VHS, beta, digital VHS, but it really wasn't. It still was on the analog side of things. When technology came forward, you saw a down sheer as far as actual human bodies that were at locations covering news, because instead of having several individuals, you literally had the talent, a digital camera, and a laptop, in a suitcase that literally has a dish that sent a digital uplink. So you had to adjust. You had to be flexible, and you had to learn. You had to recreate yourself in order to stay in that field. And now, a phone literally has more CPU power, processing power, than I'd say a complete editing suite at would TV8 27 years ago. So it allows, the platform has changed now. In some ways, anyone can actually be a driving force or an influencer in media because of technology.
That's a great way to put it, right? And it's a perfect segue, too, into chatting a little bit with Denavvia. Denavvia, I want you to tell us a little bit about the work that you do, because it is very, we talk a little bit about what podcasting and what streaming and what a radio show looks like. You do a lot of those things that rely on those new technologies. Tell us a little bit about you and your work and what that looks like.
Yeah, so I am nowhere near as formal as Mr. John here. I think I got into broadcasting because I was asked to. It was just that simple. I was focused on trying to save the world. Activism was just a fun passion for me, and it was just something that was native to what I cared about. So I came to Grand Rapids from Benton Harbor, and growing up in my small town, you know, our community was majority Black, our community was majority poor, and I remember always having questions and just not being able to find the answer. You know, like you go to school and they're like, no taxation without representation, this is America. And it's like, yeah, A on the test. And then you get home to Benton Harbor and you're like, I heard we're under emergency management and our politicians don't have the right to do anything but call a meeting to order and adjourn it. And every other decision for the city of Benton Harbor is made by someone who's not from Benton Harbor. And my parents would be like, I don't know. Like, I'm like, but this is America. No taxation. I'm like, Mom, are you paying taxes? And she's like, yeah. And like, no one just had answers for me. And I felt like at 16, like, oh, we are the people. We got to take back the power. And I didn't even know what that meant, but I wanted to do it. And so when I came to Grand Rapids, I was like, this place is like the promised land. Like, I'm at Grand Valley. I'm in college. Like, there's swing dancing at Rosa Park Circle. This place is perfect. And then the longer I was here, the more I started being exposed to those same more subtle inequities here around the lived experience you have when you're Black, or when you're a woman, or when you're younger, or when you're poor, or when you just struggle to access the resources you need. And so I got involved in that fight. And because I was in school and I was studying political science, I also decided to not just be someone who learned systems from a textbook, but from being out in the field. And so from that work, I started working on campaigns. And I moved up quickly. It was like, okay, next can you run, can you be campaign manager for David LeGrand? He's running for State House. Now can you run Rachel Hood's campaign for Drain Commission? Hey, Christian Grant's running for school board. And I started to just work in the system. And I started seeing like, okay, first, we have a problem here in West Michigan with good candidates. It's just a lot of people who own businesses, have money, they come from this Calvinist Dutch CRC background, so they are just gifted these seats because the party gets to decide based on their friends who runs what office, and that's just way too neat. I'm Denavvia Mojet, I should F that up. And so me and my friends started a PAC called Equity PAC, and we started like going into bars like Pyramid Scheme and being like, yo, we need to take back politics in West Michigan, let's out fundraise the police union tonight. And there were a lot of people in Grand Rapids who were like, hey, you're weird, what are you doing, right? And one of my mentors had just bought this radio station, 97.3 The Beat, and it was gonna be the first and only Black-owned radio station in West Michigan. And I was like super happy for him. I'm like, John, I look up to you, you're my hero. You understand media, you do all this stuff for the NAACP Image Awards, and look at you coming back to the community to start radio. And he's like, yeah, I need you to do a show. I'm like, about what? And he's like, politics. He's like, it has to be the girl from the hood of Benton Harbor who breaks down to the average person who would never watch C-SPAN what is going on in politics. And I was like, dude, your ratings are gonna just plummet. It's gonna be trash. Like, no one wants to hear me talk about gerrymandering and voter suppression in between Beyonce and Drake songs. Like, that's not a thing. And he's like, no, like, let's just try it. He's like, Sports Head Radio has a huge following. The morning show with all the comedians and DJs has a huge following. I will give you free reign to tell me what should be happening during your show and who you should be talking to, and I'll keep you abreast of the rules of the FCC of giving each candidate the same time and stuff like that. I just need you to come to the studio every week and talk to people about the coolest stuff going on in politics. And I was like, okay, well, first we're gonna talk to Movimiento Cosecha, because we're planning a protest right now called Families Belong Together, and then next week we're gonna talk to this dude who's running for clerk, because I don't think people understand what the clerk does. And he's like, whatever you want. And it just turned into this thing where I'd show up weekly, and I would geek out in the studio. I would be a nerd, and I was like in my own little bubble, because sometimes you don't notice impact when you're doing the kind of journalism that isn't tied to ratings and numbers and listeners, right? I just started to see a change in the way I moved through the community. I'd show up at Rock the Block, and they'd be like, you're from Political Pulse. Honey, I listened to your show with Chief Rahinsky. Now, I didn't even know how to pronounce his name, but after y'all talked about that little girl, Honesty Hodges, I'm about to get out here, and I might go to the next event for the NAACP. And I'm like, thank you, old people. Don't know you, but okay, you know what I mean? But then, John was like, Denavvia, I need you to start doing Facebook Live. Your biggest engagement is on Facebook. You're posting about your son every day. I need you to just start going live on your page when you're in the studio with your guest. And I was like, okay, well, Pat Miles, the Attorney General from Barack Obama, is coming in next week, and we're about to literally chop it up about this and that. He's like, go live. do it on Facebook Live. And so he would be in the studio, and again, I didn't have to learn any of the button pushing because John really made everyone else at the station learn how to push buttons and not me. And so he would literally be texting me in the studio and be like, Denavvia, I can hear you clicking your pen. Please stop clicking your pen. And I'm like, oh. Like, I'm not a journalist. I am not a good media personality. I'm just being myself, and people listen because they like it. And we're talking about stuff they care about. And I tell people at the beginning of the show, welcome to Political Pulse with Denavvia Mojet, unapologetically single black mom over here, just about to ask questions that I care about. And I think the difference is that when people turn on Wood 8 or WZZM 13 or Fox 17, they'll get this sterile version of the information, right? And it's so sterile that it oftentimes feels distant from what they really are thinking. And I tell people when they come to my show, like, hey, I'm gonna ask questions that we really wanna know. Don't get offended. You know what I mean? Because I'll ask the chief of police, do you have any kids? Like, do you have children? You know what I mean? I know that Wood TV 8 may not ask you this. They're just gonna ask you about the youth engagement policy. But as Braden's mom, I wanna know, do you have any kids? Do you chill at the splash pad on Saturday, at the splash pad and hear what we're talking about since that video of that little girl? Because I think that's what people wanna know too. That's just as important to them. And I think because this all happened to me semi-accidentally, over Facebook Live and over what turned into a podcast on Spotify and Apple Music, I realized that there were people who were coming to Political Pulse because they trusted the information just as much as they cared. They cared about what was going on. They just didn't care enough to go get the information from the places where we're taught it's supposed to come from. They don't want to watch CNN all night. They don't want to watch C-SPAN. They leave that to the dorks like me. But what I've realized is that I can show up at the basketball court with a bunch of thugs and gangsters and be like, come on, let's talk about emergency management laws. I've been doing that since I was 17. And so I know how to speak prolifically and run a campaign and talk to donors and build strategies for, you know, the field organizers and the fundraising directors. And then I also know how to turn that off and go talk to my community like we're all just moms who want to know what's going on, and we can tackle the nuances of being pro-life or pro-choice. We can tackle the nuances of being pro-bus drivers and understanding union tactics, right? Like, things that people would not normally want to talk about, if they're scrolling on Facebook Live and they see me talking about it, they'll stop and be like, what is Denavvia talking about today? And then later on, when I'm at the movies or hanging out with my girlfriends and swing dancing at Rosa, they're like, man, I really appreciated that show you did on Voters Not Politicians. Like, that was kind of cool. Like, I really liked that show, you know what I mean? And it turned into a thing where I recognized that news doesn't have to be so sterile and so formal that it comes down to what we see today, where people have pit all these different media sources against each other, right? This is fake news, this is a lying journalist. What I really think is could be the savior of truth, right? Because truth only matters if people share it. Is that if we tell the truth to each other, when people that you know are honest and people that you have access to, who you're gonna grind your coffee beans next to in the Bridge Street Market, if they are telling you what is going on at the city, not only can you believe it, not only can you trust it, but it's more palatable, it's more accessible, and it just leads to more engaged people. And since I've left doing Political Pulse and gone back into organizing and lobbying and doing work in the cannabis industry, every election, like clockwork, I open my inbox of, you know, people that you're not friends with who write you anyway, and it's just people asking me, who do I vote for? And I respond the same every time. I don't know where you live, but here's a link to where you can pull a sample ballot if you're a Michigan resident, right? Because there are people who are looking for someone to tell them what to do to make the hard decisions, and it's not really about whether or not they touched Wood TV 8 or WZZM 13. They just want to know that the choice they make makes sense for them as a regular person with regular concerns. And that's what Political Pulse used to do for people, and that's why we're bringing it back this summer as not just a radio segment, but actually on GRTV, so people can stream it on Channel 25, and also where they can get their podcast, and again, as a live stream on Facebook and also YouTube now.
That is a really great answer about
She's a badass.
really important local outlet. Yep, absolutely.
No, really, respectably.
And that's a great way to segue too. I want to talk to Elizabeth a little bit about her small online local outlet doing really important work. My question for you, Elizabeth, we talked about this a little bit in the green room, which is about the world that your outlet is in right now, right? I think if this outlet had come up, say, 20 years ago, Candor Media, it would have been working against a way bigger local newspaper. It would have been in just like a completely different environment without the internet. But right now, it looks like it seems to be doing a great job covering important issues. What is it about right now, this moment right here, that seems a little bit to fit Candor Media?
Thank you. So right now, even though a lot of people feel overwhelmed with the amount of media that they receive, it doesn't mean that you're getting good, consistent local news. 20 years ago, like you said, the press was full. They had 120 people that were full-time reporters. They had multiple reporters covering the same beat. They would have 4, 5, 6 reporters, depending on the year, just covering local education in the region, right? Like all of our colleges, our public schools, our private schools, our charter schools. And now we have a press that is not published as often, and it's run by a larger corporation, right, MLive, and then MLive, when they report, they have 5 or 6 people for the whole West Michigan. So not Grand Rapids, not 5 or 6 people for our town, 5 or 6 people for the whole area, right? Holland, Muskegon, all of that. And we used to live in a world where we had 5 or 6 people that were just talking about our colleges and our schools. So now we live in a city where we have one of the biggest public school systems in the state, and we have 14,000 kids, and there's not a single dedicated reporter talking about the problems and the wins in local public schools. Denavvia talked about people wanting people that they know, people that they trust, to bring them information. And if you look at a newspaper now, a lot of it is syndicated. And I'm not saying that those journalists are doing a bad job. I'm just saying it's not local news. Like, we don't know what's going on in our own city halls, in our own county commissions, right? When the newspaper was more fully staffed, they had people in City Hall all day. Like, that was like some guy's job, was all he did was report on the local meetings, the public meetings in city government. Now, we live in a city, one of the biggest cities in the state, right? 200, how many people? 250,000 people in Grand Rapids. And there's sometimes where if I can't make it to a local city commission meeting for a city this size, and it doesn't get reported on. That's crazy. That's bananas. That's the world that we live in now. People will show up when something dramatic happens, right? When, unfortunately, we have had a lot of problems with our police department, right? And so then all the news stations come in. But the regular reporting that us regular people need to just know what's going on in our own city, where you can, quick skim an article and be like, hey, what happened at last night's city commission meeting? What happened at last week's city commission meeting? Hey, is this a pattern? Can I, search this on a website and see where it's archived from last year or 5 years ago, like archiving local history? That just, it doesn't exist like it used to. And that's part of what Candor is trying to do, is bring some of that coverage back, because that's where the desert part comes into local news deserts.
Very well put. And also another really good segue into what I wanted to talk about next, which is about news deserts, what that means, what that looks like for a community. I have in my notes here, I was going to talk a little bit about how you pick up a copy of the Grand Rapids Press, and it is way thinner than it was not that long ago, right? And Elizabeth, you said something really interesting in the green room about how the press used to have, say, 100 to 120 people, I think is the number you used, which is just incredible for people who are working in news media now. What I want to ask about is, that's not just in Grand Rapids, that's across the country, right? There are a lot of local news outlets that are completely different than they were just 20 years ago. What does that mean? And I know this is a really broad question. I hope you guys will take this in a way that makes sense to you. But for all of you guys, what does that mean for civic life in Grand Rapids? What happens when you start to see things like that happen?
I'll start. Well, I think it's huge for civic life. Grand Rapids, as you said, is experiencing the same problems that everyone else is experiencing, where larger conglomerates keep buying up local newspapers, having their staffs again, and in order to make money for the investors and treating news like it's a tech product. And then people end up like in cities our size, without being able to look up, hey, what happened at last night's city commission meeting? And as John will tell you, everything that happens local bubbles up to national news. And so then knowing what's going on, people just don't. So how do you know who to vote for? How do you know if the police are actually being held accountable for the things that we say we're trying to hold them accountable for? How do you know if the land use department is doing things properly? Are they finding people? Are people having issues with their trash or their water? Like the normal stuff that affects our lives every day, we just don't know if it's not covered.
And I would also say there is a disconnect between people who feel like, I know what's going on, because some people, just read the headline of articles when they scroll. I read all the way to the end, so I'm informed. And then when something happens, they realize how ignorant they've still been kept by the lack of information that they actually want. And I don't really say that as like Denavvia Political Pulse, but even recently, right, like I was going to start Political Pulse again last year, and then I got pulled onto that campaign with the ACLU and NAACP. And on my firm, Mojet Consulting, we're hired to help residents talk about the budget for a 6-month campaign. And I said, you know what, I'm going to do this campaign for the ACLU and Link Up and UCC, and then I'll do Political Pulse and bring on other things next summer. When I started this campaign, we have people in the climate change community, affordable housing community, police reform community, that all are going out to have community meetings, and my firm's job is to organize this presentation that breaks down the budget, and then to survey people. And I think across all 5 of our community engagement events over that 6 months, the number one thing that we saw across all the meetings wasn't just about like what percentage of the budget is going towards environmental sustainability and what part of the budget is going to police accountability. It was people who felt like, how has no one ever broken the budget down for me before? How is it that the budget is a 500+ page document that is on the city's budget website, and every year someone says, we got a 35th year award for our great budget, but no one knows what's in it? After this meeting, I went and reached out to commissioners, and I said, hey, Mindy Hasasi, do you understand that the money is going up every year for this, or that we're not adequately funding that? And they don't know how it's being allocated. They don't even understand the nuance of it, because the way news around things like the budget are introduced are going to walk the line of a press release. And the press release is just going to tell you, we spent this much on this much on this, and this is how much the whole budget is. Ta-da! There is no deeper than that. But when it comes to, I tell people all the time, I did this in several meetings, I said, let's talk about Denavvia's budget. Now, if you came up to me in Target and said, Denavvia, would you like to defund Starbucks? The answer is no. It is unequivocally no. I never want to defund Starbucks because I love Starbucks. However much I spend on Starbucks, it's going to be enough because I like to buy Starbucks. However, if you sit me down and show me all of my priorities and say, Denavvia, winter's coming, your heat's going to go up because you're never going to turn the dial down. You're going to have to spend more on your electric, your Xfinity's are going to go up because your favorite show's coming back. You're about to add back on Stars and HBO. Where are you going to pull from? I will say, girls got to suck up and defund Starbucks, okay? We're going to cut her for a few months, and we're just going to go hard on the Keurig. And that is okay. That is me making a mature decision that aligns with my priorities. When has the city ever asked you what your priorities were? When has the city ever broke down for you how much is going into all the buckets so you can decide what's proportionate? And why is it that anytime we say we need a balanced budget, everyone screams, don't defund the police, and looks away? That is not how adults budget. Let's have mature conversations. You deserve this information. These are your tax dollars. And everybody just was like, she's right. We can totally talk about the budget and not be defund the policers. Whoa, what a relief. But it's like, for years, we should have always known what was in the budget. We should always be informed on these things. These are our tax dollars. This is our city. And even after we started these meetings, it was funny. I woke up one morning, and I had an email from the city manager. And it's like, Denavvia, we'd like you to come down to City Hall to meet with the budget office. And I called our lawyers at the ACLU, and I was like, Mark knows about my campaign where we're educating people on the budget, and they want to talk to us. Can you hold my hand and come with me to this meeting with the budget office? Because scary things start to happen when you start giving people information. Like, knowledge is power. We're making people deadly, right? Like, come with me to the budget office to talk to the CFO of the city about her document. And when we walked into this meeting, they're just like, so you're telling people about the budget, are you? Yeah, it's their budget. taxpayer dollars. Where are you getting this information from? Your document. You published it. It's public. It's like on the website. And, well, where are your visuals coming from? Screen snips that I stole from your budget document. It's like a pie chart. I took a picture of it and showed it to everybody. It's page 128. You know what I mean? And they were like, and people care. People are coming to this. Yes, this is news. This is something people are so excited to understand. Well, the communications department doesn't really work with the budget office to talk about what's in it. Well, they should. People want to know this. And it seems to me like sometimes this disconnect people have between news and media and not getting enough information that really matters to them is a byproduct of, like Elizabeth is saying, when everyone downsizes and everything's not being covered with the same quality or the same tenacity, those same questions aren't being answered. The fact that the CFO of the city sat across from me and said, you know what? She said, what was the word she used? Oh, adversarial. She said, I'm so glad this wasn't adversarial. A lot of times when activists come into City Hall, that's what they think it's gonna be. Sometimes it's just an innocent girl who loves data sharing it with her neighbors. But sometimes that can get a really bad rap, And she's like, I'm so glad this wasn't adversarial. It's exciting to know that people wanna hear about the budget. I'm like, yes, ma'am, the budget is sexier than you ever knew. You know what I mean? And like, if we just covered the news in this city in the way that people wanna get it, people not only would be informed, they would be engaged. You know what I mean? Because for the CFO to have never been asked, what percentage of our spending is going towards affordable housing? She's like, I don't even know how to find that answer. That's not how we talk budget. Well, that's because you talk budget to other accountants. You need to have a plan to talk budget to taxpayers. Like me, single moms. We want to understand it. So how much of this is Starbucks? You know what I mean? Like, talk to me like a human being. It's my information. And that is the way news is supposed to feel, and it's not right now. And I think that's the problem.
And real quick, I want to hear from John on this really quickly, but Denavvia, we talk a little bit about all this particular journalism you're doing, going out to City Hall, reporting on the budget, and we also talk a little bit about the connections that you make with people through social media when you're streaming. So we talk about the way that local media is changing. How much of what you do would be possible, say, 20 years ago? Because it sounds like there are elements of it that are really becoming more and more possible right now.
None of it would be possible 20 years ago, even. I think I benefit from the convenience of pushing a button and making a lot of noise. You know what I mean? I will ask my friends to meet me at Rosa Parks Circle for our Art Prize pop-up anti-racism rally, and they're like, I'm game, you know what I mean? We couldn't do that 20 years ago. I did not have to learn how to write a press release to start a movement. And I think that is the beauty of social media. You know what I mean? And that changes things alone. That means I can get a message to masses without having to go through a reporter or a journalist or someone who is, a trained or certified influencer of the masses. And that is disruptive in and of itself, that someone would trust me on my Facebook live stream with my little logo from Canva over somebody who is on Xfinity's channel 13, right? Like, oh, I know her. I see her with her, German Shepherd pulling her down Rosa Parks Circle every Tuesday, so I know she lives in this community too and is also trying to figure out what to put on the ballot as well. That wouldn't be possible without, the ease and convenience of social media. And even most recently when I've been thinking about what are the new ways that political pulse reemerges and what's different about it that accommodates even how things have continued to change. I mean, just last week I had a whole meeting about branding reels. I told them, I said, I want to do a 60-second reel on drones, but we're going to make jokes the entire time calling them SUAS because no one knows what an SUAS is, which is why that's what the city is calling them now. The word drones is too provocative. So now the police don't say they're asking for drones, they say they're asking for SUAS, small unmanned aerial systems. Let's do funny reels about it. Let's spend the entire time saying SUAS, drones, and continue talking to people about this survey and engagement because 60-second reels or these little heartbeats of information are going to be just as important to me as my hour segments on Pulse. You know what I mean? In between our segments, I can still drop a 60-second reel about something going on in the city that is going to poke fun at something that the city is doing. And then I can, go back and chill in the hammock in my backyard and just be disruptive. Let the reel be shared and, go viral and just show up at the next city commission meeting like I'm just here like everybody else. I don't have to be a journalist to do that. I can just do it because I'm Denavvia. And that is the power of Facebook and TikTok and Instagram.
That is a great answer that gets directly into social media, which I want to talk about in just a second, but I also want to make sure that John has a chance. If you wanted to weigh in, a lot of really smart comments ago, the question was about civic life, right, and news deserts, and I didn't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to that discussion.
Yes, there is. You brought up so many great points that are really to the point of it, and I want to touch one basis on as far as, and also you as well. Both of my colleagues here have brought up such good points, and as I was sitting here and listening and starting to think, because there are a number of things that I've noticed over the past few years. A few years ago, when we were going through the entire COVID, and then we had, you know, even on a national level, world news level, clips of squad cars burning in downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan, in protest, you know, of citizens that are here. You know, I remember sitting in my home office studio and watching that in real time, literally. It's streaming and watching it. And at the same time, I'm also an amateur radio operator, so I was talking to a number of individuals here in Western Michigan. If you go over to my house, you'll see antennas literally, you know, over my home, and I'm keying up and I'm talking, and we're talking and listening in real time. And I have to tell you, after that episode that happened in downtown Grand Rapids, unbeknownst, but the city of Grand Rapids Police Department came up with a need for a increase or an upgrade in its internal communication between downtown Grand Rapids and then squad cars. But what they left out of the fact is the fact that the FCC also allows, on a national level, it is actually a mandate, Freedom of Information Act, squad cars communicating, your scanners. Now it's digitalized and you cannot listen to it. And that wasn't announced to the taxpayers. They left that part that was out. There's a time, because I live over here, you know, in this community, literally grew up in this community. There was a time I could sit in the privacy of my home and literally listen to, at being an amateur radio operator, listen to squad cars, what was going on in my community, the nature of what was going on in my community, and it was not a hindrance to the Grand Rapids Police Department, but it also, at the same time, gave me a feeling of understanding and some type of insight of what was happening in my own community, because I'm a taxpayer and, well, damn it, I have a right to know. Now, there's just a squad car flying down Wealthy Street and the lights are going on and I have no idea. And then later on, there's a segment that says, well, there was a shooting or something like that that happened. If you live in that community, you want to know what's going on because you want to be able to come together as a community and say, hey, look, you know, how can we work with you, for example, the Grand Rapids Police Department, and help in our own community to start dealing and addressing some of these things. But instead, if you're going to digitalize and take that Freedom of Information Act from the FCC off the air so we don't even know what's going on, that really isn't communicating. And that would have been a libel if that information, if we had coverage that said, look, there's a bill that's out, it's going to affect, you know, funding for the Grand Rapids Police Department. We're calling it an upgrade in communication, but did you know that in the fine print somewhere down there on the page that police scanning will no longer be something that's open, it's going to be scrambled. And I was very upset with the fact that Wood TVA, Channel 13, WOTV, all local news segments, instead of actually being appalled of it, some were, but they were silenced when the GRPD made a deal with Wood TV and 13. Hey, look, we'll give you that scanner. You'll have access to that scanner, so now you can disseminate if you're going to send a crew there, but we're going to leave that up to you. But we're going to give it to you, and as long as you have it, don't complain about the fact that we're shutting this access off to the rest of the community that's here. And so those are just some of the things as far as social media is concerned, and if we don't have the professionals you know, that are involved, that are asking questions of the gatekeepers, we'll continue to lose information. We will continue to struggle to be aware of what's going on in our environment.
But really quick, Sam, if I could just add, that's another one that I think citizens can do as well. Like, I think I've never been someone who listened to the scanner to find a story, but my neighbors always know when something's going on. You know what I mean? I tell people all the time, nosy is my superpower, which means I'm gonna find out for fun. You know what I mean? I'm gonna be good at the search. And so when things are going on in my neighborhood, whether I am learning about it in Nextdoor or when I'm reading about it in all our little We Are Westsider groups, I'm like, ooh, let me go look down on Pine. 6 cop cars, 3 people just got arrested. Like, we literally are reporting all the time on what is going on in our neighborhood and from our different perspectives, from our phones, just to keep each other informed, because we know that it's not like we can just turn on the news and they're gonna say, right now on Jackson Street, there are 12 cop cruisers going, you know what I mean? It doesn't, that's not what the news is anymore. And I feel like I was raised by my grandma, and my grandma was from the South. She was from Arkansas. She was one of 13. She picked cotton growing up. She was the 7th child. And my grandma used to love the radio. My grandma genuinely believed that when something happens, you go turn on the radio. And I used to be like, no, we're not gonna just be listening to the radio. We can play like some music. We're not gonna just be listening for them to tell us the thing we wanna hear at the moment we wanna hear it. Like, I hated that. And I think because we have social media now, we don't have to do that, right? Because of social media, if we don't want to listen to the scanner to figure out where the police are going or where the story is, we can literally just refresh in Nextdoor, and everyone who has heard gunshots on Jackson, 6 cops just showed up, 2 more just got here 30 minutes later. We are still following what the police are doing. We just don't have the journalists and the reporters or the steady stream of people that are standing there to tell us in real time what's happening. But we're still passing that information around, and people that are really on the pulse of the city because they're in the city still know those things, because nosy is all of our superpower.
But also having officers, and not to disagree, but also having a live feed keeps them accountable also.
It does, yes.
Great discussion. And as I have you guys answer this question, which I don't know, I'm going to ask Andrew, librarian extraordinaire, to give me a signal while you guys are answering if we have time for more after this. But there's a thread that's been running through a lot of these answers here, which is social media in the background, right? One of the huge things that has completely changed, for better and for worse, right? I know on one side of the coin, Elizabeth was talking a little bit about how some of these bigger local institutions are getting hollowed out, right? I know you turn on the national news, a lot of people are drawing a connection between social media and misinformation, too, in the news. But Denavvia is making great points about being able to bring new voices to people, to be able to get closer to readers and news consumers in a way that we couldn't before. So certainly, we've seen a lot of disruption, and the question I want to offer you guys is whether social media and the changes we've seen, has that helped or has that hurt overall the news?
Oh, that one's big. I would say unequivocally both, definitely both. It has hurt the news in the sense that you have enormous corporations with tons of power like Facebook, now Meta, who, decide the algorithms, right? And in 2016, when everyone, like, all you saw were news articles in your Facebook feed, it's because that's what was keeping people on social media and getting everybody riled up, and whether it was true or not didn't matter as much. And then they also did something like where they were like, oh, we're going to do video. All of you news corporations, you should do video. And so news corporations literally changed their budget, changed who they hired, made all these videos. And then later it came out that Facebook, like the numbers that they said that they were sharing, it wasn't true. And these new organizations lost money, they lost viewers. Eventually those people got laid off. And so really terrible things have happened to people's trust in news because of corporations caring more about clicks and money and advertising than what is true, than supporting democracy. This has been very well documented. So that's been very, very terrible for news. The whole phrase of fake news, the whole idea that exists, that's something that we have to deal with, has been horrible. On the other hand, social media, the ability to connect, the ability for people to start movements, to share information for each other, to not have to wait for the single guy who historically is like the white guy on the news to tell them what's happening in their town, but to tell each other what's happening in their town. All of the movements that we've seen in the last decade, they've all been possible to grow as big and as fast as they did and to be sustained the way that they have because of social media and because of how people share news with each other. And that side of the power, you know, they say the pen mightier than the sword, that part is still incredible. It's still amazing. Like Denavvia talking about making reels and using humor to inform people. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is get on TikTok and see how 25-year-olds are producing news and sharing it with their peers, because it's incredible. They're using the tool that is their main social media at the moment, and the different, I don't know, mores and manners and rules, spoken and unspoken, right, that happen on different social channels, and using that format to inform each other. And I love that stuff. I love that that's possible. I love how easy it is, you know, like with our phones and our cameras. I do a lot of my work on my phone. I mean, yes, I still write articles on my laptop, but I can also leave a city meeting and talk into my phone and have the article halfway written, but by the time that I get home. So that part is incredible. And that's the part, I think, where I would pitch that we need to keep working on making sure that that is democratized, that people still have access to that we keep fighting the big companies and their algorithms so that they don't control that flow of information, because we really do have a lot of power there, and there's a ton of good possibility still.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that she said, because this is a very nuanced answer, so I'm not going to answer it with respect to media and news. I'm just going to answer it high level. I think technology is supposed to be disruptive, and I think when we don't allow technology to disrupt our sense of convention, you know, our evolution as people are just constipated, right? Like, we need to keep growing, keep discovering, keep trying new things. And I'll admit I didn't feel this way when I was younger, but you know, now I'm a mom, and I have this 6-year-old boy, this first grader in my house, who I believe just, you know, lives his whole life with one foot in crazy and imagination land and the other foot in reality. And I feel like this new generation of kids that have grown up with an artificial intelligence device in every room, whose number one response is, I'll ask Alexa. Alexa, my mom said, remind her in 5 minutes I can go outside. My mom said, 1 more minute. Alexa, remind her in 1 minute. And it's like, okay. You know what I mean? When I watch what they can do with artificial intelligence and all these new things, I realize that media, news, everything that we relied on to stay the same absolutely has to change. It has to. It is making no space for them. I don't even see a future where my son thinks the only way he can get information is to go sit in front of a TV and wait till the 6 o'clock cycle starts. You know what I mean? That is not how my son works now, at 6. He gets into Discord, the Mid-Journey, and generates artificial intelligence art and prompts AI to make his inventions. He's like, Mom, I just made a yellow hovercraft with purple propellers, and it has space treads, and it's in Mars. I'm sending it to print in your office. And okay, you know what I mean? Their world can't be the one that my grandma grew up in. And so we have to decide now that although social media is disruptive, even if these big companies went away, if Meta went under, social media would not. You know what I mean? Even if TikTok got banned, the nature of using TikTok for information would not go away. And so we're already trying to keep a foothold in something that was just so big because it just was for so long that we sometimes forget that the future is coming whether we want it to or not. You know what I mean? And I remember all the time, I spend all my days in meetings with people that are older than me, and I go home every night to my little weirdo. And that little weirdo reminds me that all the things that the grown-up spent all day trying to protect and maintain and keep stagnant, he is going to flip on its head. And I'd rather just be more interested in how we build his world so that he has a little bit less lifting to do, because that is where we're going to be no matter what. You know what I mean? So that's my pro and con. That's just, if you guys don't believe me, go find some crazy tiny human, spend a healthy amount of time with them. You will know I'm right, because they are weird. And all this stuff that we did, they are not going to keep the way we ran it. They just aren't. They're trying to go see Venus, okay? They're trying to bring dinosaurs back. They're trying to make Pokemon DNA with KitchenAid blenders. These kids, this next group, this next generation does not want a world where the only place the news comes from is a 6 a.m. and a 6 p.m. cycle. And that's just never going to be what they accept as the standard. So,
John, did you have any thoughts on, of course, social media?
Well, yes, I do. I think social media is here to stay. I think social media has been here for 100 years, to tell you the truth. It's just that the platform that it exists in is completely different. I think that one of the most important things, even just kind of on a broader perspective of as far as social media is concerned, social media is fine. What happens in the breakdown and the failure is when we as human beings fail to use critical thinking. You have to apply critical thinking. Do not allow social media to take away your capability and your awareness of being able to critically think. At the end of the day, critical thought. And critical thought is something that I hope that the generation moving forward holds on to. Social media will not be able to make better relationships between you and your parents, between you and your work environment or your world or your personal life. Critical thinking and communicating and listening at the end of the day is the most powerful ingredient. Social media can help, but it cannot replace critical thought.
Great answer. Great panelists today. I'm looking toward the back of the auditorium. I don't know, Andrew, do we have time for anything else? I know we had wanted to do a Q&A at the end, which is why I also don't know if we'd wanted to transition to anything like that. Okay, well, it sounds like we do have a moment for some audience Q&A. There's been a lot of wonderful answers up here. What I was thinking I could do, and again, Andrew, feel free to give me some pointers. I might come down into I might come on down into the audience and just bring my microphone around. So are there any questions that people might want to ask our panelists? I see one right there. On my way. And keep those hands up so I can see where you guys were.
Yeah, great panel. Thank you so much for all of your expertise. Obviously, journalism and media has been facing a lot of challenges, especially right now. If you got a genie with one free wish and you got to change something about the sort of landscape of journalism right now, what would it be?
I know this is weird, but I've been reading these books from my old ethics class, and I realized that the same way we are obsessed with verifying, and metrics to measure popularity, if I could restructure the world, I know this is so weird, just things you think about on shrooms, I would build a metric for measuring like the veracity of truth. I think we just need a measurement for truth, like how true something is, based on how much is missing from it. And I know that sounds so weird, but I wrote a journal entry about it. If we just had a universal measure for truth, in a way that like we take substance, we measure how much of it is true, and how true it is on the scale of the substance that's out on the topic. And then people just see that the same way they see a blue check mark, 80%, 90%, 2%, whatever. That's kind of my weird Denavvia wants of the world that doesn't exist yet thing. So it's probably not helpful, but that's why no one's given me a genie yet, because it's pretty weird over here. You? Yeah.
I like it. No, that's one of our huge issues, right? Is people don't know who to trust. I have my own family comes to me and tells me their feelings about news, and they don't know what to trust. Yeah. I think the two answers that came to my head, just because of the tumultuousness of what's been happening in news, like I mentioned before, bigger corporations buying out local papers and then making them regional and buying them more and more. Literal venture capitalists, that's one thing that I would change, right, is if venture capitalists could not buy newspapers, if we could have more, maybe the larger answer is as a renewed awareness in the importance of journalism as the fourth estate, not just nationally, but locally, in keeping local politicians accountable, like Denavvia is talking about the budget, like it's our money. We give them so much money and we still have bad roads and highly defunded schools and, all of these problems, and where does that all go, right? So just an understanding of the importance of local journalism as the fourth estate, and then a renewed drive by family businesses or journalism cohorts or whatever to start local, I guess not newspapers, but news sites or news channels in different towns, right, all across America, because it's people need the news. The other thing is, I thought of two answers, is just some law that would hold these massive companies like Meta accountable for how they do their algorithms, and more transparency there so that the stuff that they share is actual news and not just clickbait and not incendiary, and is beneficial to us as humans, right? Taking care of each other in democracy and not just about money. But that's maybe a pipe dream.
You said a genie in a bottle, right? It may sound so simple, but it really isn't. My answer would be fair accessibility, accessibleness across the board. And I mean that specifically on a granular financial level. The poor school district compared to one that has wealth and revenue. And for those students, those future generations to have equal access and exposure to physical materials, hardware, and some type of formal training of how that hardware works, and then leaving the critical thinking up for that individual student/journalist. What do he or she or they want to cover? That's really my answer.
Some great answers. It looks like we have one more question over here.
I have two questions. One, Denavvia, do you think if there was a rating system like there are for products, where people could star for accuracy or something like that, do you think something like that could work? Because reading all the reviews, that's one way to get feedback on how true something is, but it's a lot of reading. It's kind of exhausting. If there were stars, you could kind of see aggregate ideas on the accuracy. And then I also wanted to ask, oh shoot, I can't read your name, but what Candor Media is and how it gets funded.
Yeah, so I love the idea of a rating system. The reason why in my dream journal entry this was a technologically fueled metric is primarily because when you ask people to rate something, anything, you can typically buy those ratings because you can pay people to say or do whatever you want them to do, which is why I hate the system now, which is like you decide that something must be valid because it has a lot of people who watch it, when the majority of the people who you are trying to follow were bought and are not actively engaged. And that is, I think, the fundamental flaw of the way things are now. You follow popularity, you follow a mass. And the larger the mass, the more trustworthy you assume the leader must be. When I studied political science, and I can build a mass anytime I want. You know what I mean? I can build a mass in the abortion movement, in the cannabis movement, in the police reform movement. If I want to pack a project, I can do that. That's numbers. That's SEO, search engine optimization. But now I question everything. I trust nothing and no one, and I just wish artificial intelligence would just add to all of my content. how much of that is, sourced from something credible, I guess. So I would argue that I wouldn't trust the system if it was only built on people using it. But I definitely would like the idea of people also adding an element of maybe scoring journalists, maybe scoring the networks and saying this person is rated 5 stars on relevant stories, 5 stars on accuracy, 5 stars on, candidness and ease of understanding. Like, those types of things I think would be cool. But I definitely think we need something that is not fueled by people rating it, people reviewing it, and people making it by numbers more valid. So put that in your brain and make it into an app or something.
Candor Media is a local and investigative news site, so you can just get online, candormedia.org. We're a relatively new company, 2 or 3 years. We started during the pandemic, really, because there were things to cover, right? We're a business, so the way that we're funded is we get paid to do jobs. So local news is not the football team right now. We also make videos and documentaries. Recently, we made a documentary about the housing and homelessness crisis in Kent County. Like everything we've talked about today, it's a national crisis, and it's also a local crisis, and it's a crisis here that's worse than it is in some other places. So we were paid to do that. We worked with a local organization, and so that's, where our funding has come from recently. We're still building up our local news site. Obviously, the long-term goal, right, is that we have enough readers that we can do some advertising or maybe do some sponsored content, kind of things like that. It's very difficult, I'm not gonna lie. Starting your own business is hard, right? News is hard. And then now, in the times that we're in, like, our industry is literally crumbling around us, right? There's constantly news organizations, even bigger ones that people were emulating that wanted to be like, we want to be like BuzzFeed News, we want to be like Vice News. They literally, as of the last couple of weeks, don't exist anymore. So trying to do a news business is, it's a couple impossible jobs at a time, but we're very passionate about it. One story that I want to attach to this, because it's part of why we started, right, is I'm one of 3 co-founders. There's also Michelle Jokish Polo and Jose Guadalupe Jimenez. Jose is from LA, and part of the reason that he moved here is because he wanted to help local news in Michigan. Because one of the stories that he heard when he was in LA is during the Flint water crisis, there were people, Spanish speakers, who were getting their news, because, right, it made national news, who were getting their news from relatives in California, because there wasn't Spanish language news about the Flint water crisis in Flint. Not all of our coverage is bilingual, that's our long-term goal, but we have done lots of bilingual coverage, and that's one of the reasons that we started, is because we want people in Grand Rapids to get the news in English, in Spanish, in their language, and not have to rely on people elsewhere. But kind of like what I said before, right, about how if I'm not at a meeting, sometimes it doesn't get covered. Like, that's bananas that somebody was relying on somebody, all the way over on the coast to get news about whether they can drink their own water. This is a big deal.
Any other questions out there today? Yes, one more. This will be our last one.
All right. So when trying to pursue, truth in our local happenings and politics or just any issues going on with the intent of being well-informed like ourselves, but also trying to share with our neighbors and build a more well-informed community, what kinds of questions have you found especially useful in that pursuit, or what kinds of questions are useful when you don't maybe have a background in journalism or don't know where to start, but want to become more engaged with what's going on?
This is going to seem really basic, but it's still always true, which is to follow the money. Where is the money coming from? Where is the money going? Especially when it's civic issues. Everything that you look into and you're trying to figure out what's happening and why it's happening, who's spending the money? Where's the money coming to fund what's happening? Because that often answers a lot of questions.
Yes, to follow the money. Anyone who's ever stayed up all night going over campaign finance reports will tell you that's where all the juicy information is. But no, I think for me, I think I've just learned that I ask what I really want to know. I remember that I'm not just reporting on a topic or a story, but that every story is a story that I need to go into and come out of asking first and foremost, why do we care? Like, why does this matter? Why are we talking about this today? Why are you here? You know what I mean? Like, how is this going to affect Denavvia tomorrow? If I can't answer that question for my viewers or my listeners, then I have no business bringing it to the air, in my opinion. I don't do fluff. Fluff is boring. And when you do media for fun and you do reporting as a hobby or just something that you love, people watch and people listen because it's something that actually matters. I've realized that if I just turn into one of those platforms that just regurgitates whatever's in the press release, then I just need to shut up and go do something else in my time. But when stuff actually matters to me, and I have to first say, why do I care about this? And how am I, where does my suffering sit? Or where do I lose by not knowing this information? That's where I start, and that's where all my questions come from, and then they stem from. Because I need my viewer to feel like they're not just tuning into something that they were gonna watch anyway, that every single time they click me, it literally has to be something that I tell them they need to know, and they actually agree. So that's why I ask the questions I ask. And even when I am not acting as like a reporter or a journalist or as someone on Political Pulse at Denavvia Mojet, I do that everywhere in community. So like people see me all the time like moderating panels and like forums on local politics. I do that there too. Like sometimes people will hire me and they'll have a list of questions that I'm supposed to ask, but I always negotiate and say, can I start and finish with Denavvia's very own questions? And the last time I did this was actually for an affordable housing event. Grand Rapids for Affordable Housing has an annual forum that they do for politicians. Just this last time I asked the first question of everyone on the stage, what was their housing journey today? Are they renters? Are they homeowners? Have they ever been homeless? Were they transient? Were they couch surfing in college? What's your housing journey look like before you were the politician that you are today, vying for second ward, the first ward, third ward? And then I asked all the questions about the millage. And then I finished by saying, leaving this today for people that are looking for somewhere to go, somewhere to stay, something to, you know what I mean? What resources do you have for them? Those questions weren't on my question list, but afterwards, when I talked to folks, they were like, oh man, I cannot remember a lot of what they said about that long policy, but I really appreciate it. Now I know she has 9 kids and used to be homeless. She's not just a commissioner, right? Because there's still people behind politics. And I think questions like that are the ones that people actually walk away remembering, which is kind of wonky, but it's the truth.
I really can't say what questions I would necessarily ask. But I think in my career over the years, I have learned to become pretty well honed in with recognizing, first of all, who are the gatekeepers? And a gatekeeper tends to do either one or two things, or 2 to 3 things. Either a gatekeeper is to keep you where you are, and they do not want you to pass, like Gandalf, or they want to keep you where you're at for a certain reason. So just looking back, internally working in media, working through the classical media, going to school, getting the classical degree, going and working for the classical environment. Internally, I was able to slowly start recognizing who was the gatekeeper. Why can't I move from this department to that department to that department? And then outside of that organization, applying that from the world, and who is the gatekeeper? Usually the gatekeeper is the person that's trying to control whatever that truth is, trying to control the narrative, And then from that point on, depending on the scenario, asking that gatekeeper specific questions to that scenario or that environment, if that makes any sense.
Great questions and great answers here. Thank you guys for coming out and hearing our panel, and thank you to our panelists. A round of applause for our panelists today. They were great. We have John Hare, Denavvia Mojet, Elizabeth Drouillard. They are going to be around. Feel free to ask them some questions as they're milling around, and please do stick around. We've got lots more for you today.